Hel- Hello, Tahitia.
Hey, Melonya.
How are you?
I'm good. Happy Friday. You
Happy
ready?
Happy Friday. Let's go, let's go, folks. Um, well, hot topics for today. This is what I'm bringing to the table.
Okay,
Florida
okay.
law limiting children on social media. That's one topic for today. That goes into effect January 1st. This next topic is happening in our own backyard. Independent Health to pay up to 98 million for alleged fraud. Independent Health is headquartered here in Buffalo, and I've got some questions regarding that. And then the last one is Louisiana Department of Health ordered to stop promotion of vaccines. And I thought to myself, why would a sick population or citizenry, can I say that right? Citizens, what is the advantage of that? And so I asked Chat GPT and I got some answers for you. So that's what I'm offering today.
Okay. And I am offering one large topic, which is President Biden and the ERA, right? So the Equal Rights Amendment. And there's some debate that if President Biden orders I'll get into it, the archivist to just sign the paperwork, the ERA will go forward. And I have some thoughts about that after doing a little bit of a deeper dive, and it might be surprising what I think about that. And I'm curious to hear what you think about it. So that's what we're talking about today.
That's what we're serving today, folks. So let's get
Welcome to MT
started, shall
Fridays.
we?
We're Melonya Johnson, owner of Be Smart Coaching, and Tahitia Timmons, owner of Conscious by Us. Together, we're here to fill your Fridays with unscripted conversations that cover the gambit: politics, current events, science, social justice, health and wellness, and more. We're here to elevate the conversation. We're fighting the brain drain, one unscripted conversation at a time. So grab your coffee, tune in, and let's dive into another episode of MT Fridays.
Well, let's start with the ERA, shall we?
Yes. Because you wanted me to go first. So for those who don't know this, the Equal Rights Amendment, and I am probably not going to be as organized as you are with this because it like filtered into my brain recently. But anywho, it's something that women have been trying to get passed forward for quite some time now. And one of the sticky things on this is since Trump was elected, there's now 38 states. So it needed to have 38 states pass it, or three-quarters of the states approve it. It's gone through the different things that it needs to be. Okay, stop.
I do
Yes.
have a question. ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yes,
What does that?
so the Equal Rights Amendment for women would have given women equal rights. So it discusses the gender piece. So right now the Constitution talks about equal rights for men. And it doesn't seem like a really big deal, but it is sort of a big deal. So there's a great Times piece out there about the ERA, and if Biden orders the archivist, which is the piece that it needs. So the archivist needs to officially sign it off and put the document into whatever, I don't know, whatever the process is, and then it becomes an official part of an amendment of the Constitution guaranteeing women equal rights. And what that means is that things like Dobbs, which Dobbs is one of the acts that allows for, looking at privacy, right, for women. And it's one of the reasons why women's rights have been in the forefront when it comes to healthcare and abortion. So the thought is that if this gets signed into effect, that whole piece of looking at women and gender would look differently. So but the more I thought about this, so one of the things that would probably shift for women is right now in the United States, women do not serve on the draft, right? Like I don't have a draft number. When I turned 18, I didn't get a draft number, but my son did. And so, if women have equal rights, one of the things that stymied or stopped the ERA from passing back in the 60s, 70s was that there was a very conservative Republican housewife who came out and she said, here's why I'm not really for the ERA or equal rights for women, because women have the privilege of not having to serve in the military in the United States. And women have the privilege of collecting Social Security on their husband's benefits, right? So, as a woman, as a wife, I could collect on my husband's benefits for Social Security and not work. And so she said, if we are truly equal, then we would give up these pieces and we would give up some of the things that are sitting in what we consider traditional gender roles. And so thinking about this, right, like it does seem like we're getting kind of a better deal, right? Like as women, not being forced, we can volunteer to serve, but when a girl turns when a woman turns 18, she doesn't have to join the military. Yet, if we ever have to enact the draft, it would affect men in this country, not women. Now, the other piece is the Social Security piece, right? Like, the argument was that it devalued the value that women bring to the table when they're doing the homemaker chores or the homemaker piece, which was a big, like probably a larger segment of the population back then. Economics also have shifted. Most families are two dual working families for a big, a, you know, but I would say for the conservatives, probably, right? The idea of being able to go to, more traditional families, and it does kind of eat away at the idea that a man is going to protect you and give you all of these things. But then I started thinking about, well, what about for same sex partnerships? And how does that work out when you think about collecting on spouses' benefits, right? So you're married, and let's say you get divorced over a certain time period, because I think there's a requirement you have to be together for like 8 years or 10 years. I
I
don't
think
even know.
it's 10 years.
Yeah, there's some type of length of time you have to be married. But then I started to wonder, well, how does that work out for same-sex couples? Who does get to collect if someone wasn't working? Like, is it just by higher salaries? Is this a moot point at this point, since we do have same-sex marriage? What would that look like? And why would states be against this, right? So why would you be against granting women equal rights, other than the two factors, which sound, like in my head, I'm like, oh, if there was a war, then I could like my like, a woman could get out of it. But like, what is the deficit of us actually doing that? What is the negative? Is there any real true negative to this getting passed and getting signed? Now, there is one of the legal arguments that's going on is that the time period passed. So there was a limit on the ERA. It was 1982. I believe it had to get all of the paperwork and everything done. But all of the like things that it needed kind of were already in place. So this final piece of just having the archivist sign off, which was stopped previously under a prior administration. I could name it, but I'm just going to make people look it up. They'll figure it out. It rhymes with hump. Um, but there was this thought that, hey, you guys missed the deadline, like it can't go forward. However, other amendments to the Constitution, which has been pointed out a few times, have had long time periods of needing to get support and to get pushed forward. So what would it look like if we didn't have sort of equal rights for people of color, right? So race is something that we have amendments in the Constitution for, right? So what is the negative for saying like, hey, sign this and we'll take this to the Supreme Court? Maybe it missed the deadline for the archivist signing off or this piece, but let's have a discussion about, well, why are we so afraid of women getting equal, which is different than equitable rights, equal rights in this country? And as women, are we also afraid of having really true equal rights in this country as women? Because I think there is a cadre of women in the country who do kind of like the idea of like, "Hey, he's gonna open the door for me. I don't have to open the door for him." Like, I don't need to worry about, like, men will protect women. And that also leans into Trump's statement of, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you guys." Like, you don't have to think anymore. So it's interesting that this is coming about now because all it needs is, and there is a junior senator from New York, from your area, who's kind of pushing, I think she's a junior senator, who's pushing Biden to just give the little push to the archivist and say, listen, you just have to sign it. Archivist doesn't look at it. There's no political piece to this, but it will probably start the debate, and this might be a debate that the incoming administration might not want to talk about with what do we think about women in this country? And if we had equal rights, would, because there is would there be more of an outcry about, my health is on public display for everyone, whether or not I agree to that? And what does it look like to truly have equal protection and not have gender come into play?
Hmm. Well, I have more questions than I have comments, actually. Well, I mean, honestly, I never thought about, can men collect on their wives' Social Security?
Not to my knowledge.
That's interesting. And you know what? Well, that would absolutely make sense because these are things I hadn't even thought about, but it would make sense because women who were stay-at-home moms and did not, traditionally earn, money and pay into the Social Security, it would make sense that they would be able to collect on their husband's Social Security. That does make absolute sense. And does it still make sense in today's world where women do decide to be stay-at-home moms? They do. I think first of all, let's get this straight. A stay-at-home mom works 24/7, 365 days a year, right? She does not get a day off. And so there should be some sort of protections in terms of
And
economic.
stay-at-home dads too, because I
Yes,
also started thinking
yes, that's
about,
true.
as we have been more accepting and elevated, I'm going to say we have become elevated with the idea that families can look very different. Do we probably need to have this debate about what does equality with genders look like, because we do have same-sex families, and it seems that this is tied together. It's closely tied together, and it's tied together about the conversation which you talk about a lot. What about children in society? Like, do we really care for them, or is this just a false, are we performative when we say we care about children? If you care about children, then you would care about their caregivers, and their caregivers would not necessarily need to have a gender to them. So, what would it look like if women had equal rights and we really were able to powerfully say, hey, like, I'm willing to do all the same things? And that's the question that I throw out to women, and I'm curious about. Are we really willing to do all of the same things that we in our heads think about men should do?
Well, here's the other question that I have. Again, this is a great topic because these are, like I said, I was thought that both parties could collect on the other's Social Security if you were married that at the time. So that's news to me. I
And I
guess.
could be wrong. So, because I'm thinking of it in the sense of, I know if you're a widow, you can.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking of it in the sense of there is something in there where if your spouse has remarried, the previous wife could also collect. And I'm thinking maybe that's where there's a little bit of like discrepancy, because I did have a conversation with my dad recently about, like, his benefits, just like, know that I would never have to take my parents back into my house. I'm just kidding. I love you so much. Um, I'm like, are you guys set up? Like, are you good? Because economics is a thing, right? Like, we're all out here hustling and doing our stuff. And he was like, well, I got your mom's money. So maybe, but who knows? Maybe he's never investigated, and we're all just assuming. I wonder if anybody on, because we're live. I wonder if anybody else has some thoughts about this or knows, like, um, more than me. I just brought it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
just here to poke you, like poking around, like, hey, let's think about this.
But it's also something to think about for women, or well, in this case now, women who have been stay-at-home moms, and how a change in this might impact them, right? It's something that maybe they thought about, had planned for in terms of retirement, right? So that's one thing. The other thing I guess I'm thinking is, exactly what rights are we not getting, that this would, by changing this would increase our rights in some areas? Are there any particular areas that?
So, so my understanding, and I'm gonna actually, because I want to give this what it needs. My understanding is that it really comes into play when we talk about the Dobbs decision and abortion and the ERA. So I'm gonna find the New York Times article, which does a great job of kind of explaining why the Equal Rights Amendment would be helpful, because the Dobbs versus Jackson Health, which happened in 2022, was about whether the Constitution protects the right to abortion. And this was the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So in Dobbs, the Supreme Court was looking at constitutionality of Mississippi's I'm reading this, Age Act. And this was a law that was banning abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. So basically, what happens is that it gets overturned, and so basically that's what happens. And so they're thinking that the federal piece of this might protect a woman's right to privacy, right? So now we have states that have a legal, like, you can't get an abortion in certain states. But if there's been discussion about, like, if you cross state lines, like, what are your rights then? Do you have a right to privacy? And if we were talking about privacy and rights for men to get procedures in different states, would this be the same conversation, or are our rights not protected because we are considered women? And women aren't covered in the same way because the Constitution strictly speaks to the topic of men, right? So are we even in the Constitution? If we're not in the Constitution, like, I could take this a crazy way and just say, well, then we're not covered by the law, right? Like, we could just do whatever we want. No, I'm kidding. That is not what that means. But my understanding is the idea is more to spark conversation about, well, how did Dobbs get overturned if we do have constitutional rights and if we do have the right to privacy? And that would include medical rights, right? So I think that's where this argument
Mhm.
is
Yeah,
kind of sitting.
yeah.
And it's an interesting argument. It's also interesting why it didn't go forward back in when there was a lot of push originally in the 60s and 70s to get it passed, which was the highlight that, hey, do we really want to participate in the draft? And do we really want to not have the fiscal financial piece of your husband taking care of you? So I am curious, did any of those things shift? I know the draft piece didn't change, but, and, is that fair for men? Should only men participate in the draft?
Is
Um,
is the draft, well, in, like, in Israel, women, I think, don't they have to serve
mhm.
in the military?
Yeah, there's
Everybody.
there's other countries where both genders serve in the military at some point, and there has been, discussion about, if you have a country that has, where everybody has mandatory service, what does that shift or change in your head about military service, and like how are those countries different than the U.S.? The U.S. has historically also pushed this idea that we don't want to see women being violently injured, right? Like we don't want to see women going to war. We don't want to see our daughters on the front lines. However, in a violent country with many, many guns and many school shootings, right? I don't think that school shootings are gendered, the victims. We see death of women all the time. We have high violence rates against women. We have domestic violence in the United States against women. So, what is it about like the military piece that all of a sudden we're like, well, nobody wants to see our daughters go to war? Nobody wants to see our sons go to war either, right? Like, I love my son, I love my daughter, but if we're really talking equality, then we have to be able to open our eyes and say, you know, that is the price of equality.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, I mean, my as a woman, my gut instinct is like, well, I don't want to see anybody go to war. Can we
Exactly.
figure out a way to have peace, and that's why there should be more women
Yes.
in,
And
in,
so
in
would that perhaps, would we be more cautious when it comes to war? Because it seems to be a red flag, right? The first thing that gets touted out when you talk about women in active military duty or in that piece of duty is, hey, we don't want to see women there. Well, I don't want to see men there either. Can't we work towards more peaceful solutions?
Yeah.
Would that make us more cautious? I
I,
don't
I
know.
mean, but as I oftentimes say, everything is a double-edged sword, right? There's always two sides to a coin. For every cause, there is a reaction, right? And so, what does it really mean to be equal, in society? What does that mean? And are there differences that require is I don't know. I guess the question is equality one solution type of of you know thought process? Is everybody treated the same? Well, I guess that is equality, right? I mean, that really is. So it's very interesting. You really bring up a conundrum. If you really want equality, then that means that that's a reality.
Yes, and so that's the piece that we sometimes seem to not be so eager to discuss, which is for every shift and change, there are some things that you have to get used to, and there are some changes that maybe are not necessarily positives when you're first looking at them. And so personally, for myself, looking at this, because like and this is, of course, I'm just kidding, but I've often said like, "Hey, the last jab like a divorced spouse, if you really stick it to somebody, is to go take their social security money. If you're really like angry at the person, that takes that away, right? So, or maybe it doesn't. Um, but it's what are we really getting as women? What are we trading for this idea of protective men? And I'm not a fan of and this is where like I think, most of the time I get yelled at on like social media. But, if we really want men to treat us equally, we also have to shift away from this idea that men should want to be protective towards women. Because, if we're really talking about equality, maybe we have to. I know men are larger than us. I know they have more muscle mass, But maybe we need to stop being very frail. Like, I watched a movie, and some of this is the way that women are displayed in the media and in movies. But if you watch movies, a lot of times, even if the woman has a powerful character in the movie or is part of the team, she's very like, no, the monster's coming. Like, we need to start demanding more fair representation of us throughout. That, I love seeing movies where girls and women are sharing ideas and men are caring. Like, men are just as caring, and they're capable of being caregivers and babysitters and parents. Like, I would love to see more talk about, well, what if a man doesn't want to go and work full time? Why can't he be a homemaker? Like, that, why don't we talk about homemakers as a valid career for both genders?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think those are all very valid points, and I first of all, let's get this straight. Women have never benefited or received protection from men. If you look globally around the world in terms of in here in these states,
Well, I don't wanna say what they've received, but what we like to perpetrate as the idea of the man, right? Like, the man's supposed to be
no, I'm
protective.
talking about what they received. I'm not.
Well, yes.
I mean, what they have received is abuse in many cases. They've
Yes,
received laws that do not protect them. We receive, women are not protected in society, as made evident by the fact that we cannot even, at this point in our history, control our own bodies and have agency over our health care decisions, right? And so it's a fallacy to believe that and I'm hoping that future generations of women understand that they have never been protected under the patriarchal society. They have never been. They have never enjoyed equal rights under the patriarchal society. And so, it's kind of like, excuse me, it's kind of like, when you're a child, you really want to be an adult, right? And you don't realize that, what adulthood means, and then you become an adult and you're like, "Ugh,
yeah,
well, this has been overrated," right? With equality and freedom also come sacrifices, right?
yes.
And so, and again, I'm
And
really,
the tearing down of systems that would continue to oppress us.
yeah,
And so women then truly begin to sit in the same spot as people of color who have been systematically oppressed and then released, quote unquote, from oppression by, the end of the end of slavery, right? But still, you can't go and achieve the same things. So with women into that role of people who have rights on paper, right? But are not getting rights. Would we then see change? Would we have enough people who marginalized in this country to say, hey, we have these particular laws in place, but we are still not seeing change? This says the system maybe needs to be overhauled, thrown away, or shifted, changed, gotten rid of. That was radical, right? Like, but it does make you then look at, is this a system that's built on oppression versus being able to flex and shift as it changes and you have, people who have equality.
well, I guess what I'm thinking right now is that I'm really kind of exhausted and irritated by last ditch efforts, right?
Yeah, but
Like,
he's got a couple of days, right? So he could just give a nudge.
yeah,
And
but
then, like, what's nice? I think of it like when you quit and you leave chaos, or you leave a job and you leave chaos, you're like, I started the project and I signed it, but now I've left you with all this, right? But there's still people who can carry this forward. And so if this is what it takes to open that pot up again and have a discussion around it, shouldn't these last days, maybe he spends that kind of thinking, well, what does he want to leave his legacy? This nudge that, yes, the ERA did get signed on his watch. And then if it is deemed that it didn't meet all of it, like the next phase would have to happen under the next president,
And what I'm
which
saying,
they would have to fight against that,
and
like
what I'm
saying women are not equal, which they've said, but it
Yeah,
would be
but what I'm saying,
louder.
is when I say last ditch effort is like, this is a complex conversation. And so I would like, to have some real thoughtful consideration, right? In terms of what this means to women, what this means to home givers, what this means to same-sex, couples, what this means to in terms of equality, and again, like you were saying with Social Security, right? If you
Mhm.
are a home giver and you have your work is in the home, what are your protections economically, so that because it's a sacrifice. You could be out in the workplace, but if we really want to support families, right, we would support the people who stay home and make certain that they are economically taken care of in a way that makes sense. And so I'm not saying I don't oppose, him, making this move, but we've also had 4 years to have this conversation.
Yeah, and even though it feels very last ditch, I have to say that it does seem well, from what I understand, and I'll throw the New York Times article in the chat too, so that people can find it, or like we'll throw it up on our page. But I have to say that to keep the conversation going, it does seem like he's got like, maybe ten business days left, if that, in office, where he could and see, it's everything is done already. The states that were missing to get this ratified, they actually came about after, my understanding, I think, is after it was kind of known that Trump was going to be the next president. The final states that they needed were, or things that were going on in those states, they pushed that forward. So if all you needed was three-quarters of the state, and if there was this sort of like, hey, the deadline got passed, it seems like a paperwork filing thing. And so what was pointed out was there have been other amendments that have taken hundreds of years to like get all their ducks in a row. And should an amendment to something as important as a living document, the Constitution, which is supposed to be a living document, should that have a time limit? Should you say, like, hey, this is like, should it have no limit on what you need to get all of those pieces together? Because the Constitution is the guiding principle of the United States. And by saying that, "Hey, you missed that filing," that, like, it's almost like saying, "Hey, you had to have it in 30 days. You had it in 35 days." It feels too important to have that type of time limit on it.
Eh,
And if that is all that it needed, just that, like, hey, like the archivist because they don't read it, they don't sign it, they don't look at it. That's already been done. It's already met all of its qualifications to be an amendment to the Constitution. What's missing is to have it actually placed and filed. And so that's what the discussion is about. Like, should there be like another legal is because it's very gray from what I understand. The other legal piece is, should we have time limits on amendments? Like, should you be able to say, hey, if you can't get everything together in 5 years, we're like, you can't do it anymore. Or should you have to start over? Which almost seems like, if you think about, we can, like, if you think about a small business, how hard it is sometimes to make a decision in a small business, and then apply that to something as large as the United States, with shifting ideals sometimes, and states that shift where they sit. should it not be a journey towards completion? I'm not a legal expert, as was well told by the fact that I was like, I'm not really sure about a lot of the things. Um, but which is why, like your father would have said to you, Melania, well, where's your evidence? Go investigate. I'm telling everyone, go investigate this, because it's fascinating that it sounds like it is simply, we need this final like piece. And it sounds like what Biden almost needs to do to the archivist, from the interview I listened to, was just maybe give them some bravery to do their job, which is to sign it. And then it leaves them. And then it gets picked up, and it will be picked up. We know that it will be picked up, and it will not simply just go into effect, but most likely what we brought to the Supreme Court is this: they missed the 1982 deadline. And can a state, because the other thing that happened was there were some states that went back and tried to unratify it. Like they tried to withdraw their acceptance of equal rights for women. And can you do that? Can you say, yes, I'm for this? And then some more information comes out and you go, no, I don't want to do this anymore. Because you get pressure from like the women in your state. And can you then go after the deadline and say, hey, no, we want to do this, and now we have all the states. The states have flip flopped back and forth, which is interesting with this. Like, yes, women should have equal rights. No, we heard from some women. We heard from no, we don't want this anymore. So it's fascinating. This particular, like, now they have everything they need after this tumultuous journey. Should the archivist just go and then leave it to be decided in the courts?
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, ratifying the Constitution should be rigorous, right? It should not be something.
Amendments.
I mean, amendments, to the Constitution should be rigorous. So I think that is a thing. But also, I think that again, and I think it shows again just how much consideration women get in our society, that this is a last minute kind of effort, right? I think it should be discussed. I think before something like this does go into effect, that women should be aware of this and what it means to them and what it means to future generations. And some dialogue and discourse needs to happen among women. Is this something that women want?
Well, and to be honest, I wasn't aware of this, that this was going on in the background, that there was this piece with the archive. I had heard of the ERA, and I actually thought it was, I hate to say this, I thought it just was dead in the water. Like nothing was going on with it until I heard about this particular story. And this particular, like, this sort of like last minute, can we revive it? Because it has kind of the discussion around like federal rights, right? Because there's a huge difference between the federal piece in our country and the state piece. And we see this in, federal minimum wage and state minimum wages, right? Like states' rights for individuals and federal rights for individuals are not the same, which is why some of us will say, hey, I like living in this state, but I would never go to this state because my rights would not be the same, which, like, in my mind, that is wild too, right? Like you can live in this country where you travel like literally, a couple of miles, and your rights are significantly different in another state.
But I guess the other thing I wonder, is this performative, right? I mean, because if getting this actually, making this come to fruition, it relies on the next administration, right?
Oh no, it's done. It is done. Like they don't have to do anything. What they might fight against, where they can kind of bury this, is probably the Supreme Court. But that might bring more attention if this was a Supreme Court. Because I hadn't really been following this, and I know you follow a lot of women's rights stuff, and this was probably news to you. Like I think it would get maybe bigger attention,
yeah,
and like the why it's important would be better express.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think the there's sometimes I think the piece that doesn't get communicated well by, and I'll say it's the Democrats or the left, is these complicated nuances in the legal system, right? Because like this needs to be kind of I need it sort of sorted and explained to me in an easy to digest way that uncomplicates, like, how does Dobbs fit in here? How why do women need equal rights? Why do we need an amendment for this? What does the Constitution actually say? What are the legal precedents before this? What are amendments that are similar to this that also had difficult journeys? Um, and why does this matter in the scheme of all these other things out here? Why does this matter in the context of inflation, right? Because that will always be the top news story, over rights, right? Money over rights.
Mhm.
Inflation, if inflation dropped by, I'm going to say something crazy, 5 points, right? That would always overshadow a story about women's rights,
Well,
civil rights,
well, I mean,
anything about money.
well, not only that. I mean, let's be honest with you. The corporate media is owned by the same people that own our Congress, okay, and our lawmakers, okay, and so they're going to put forth the stories in many cases that are distractions. They're not going to put forth the stories that talk about all the things that are going on in the background that which would really be no news, right? They're not going to bring those to the forefront. And so, legislation and things are passed, and we don't know, how they're impacting us because, unless you watch C-SPAN, nonstop, you probably, won't
Nonstop C-SPAN.
nonstop C-SPAN, you probably, would not know these things. But again, if it's even passed, then it gets caught up into the courts. It goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has not shown itself to be impartial these days. And so I just wonder if it's still a dead in the water thing. And I
Yeah.
think that there should be, again, before you put something this big into action, right? How do women feel about then being turning 18 and then being subject to draft? How do they feel about that? And
You know,
and
it's an
and
interesting thing to talk about, but I don't wanna eat up everything. I know I dropped, like, a duty bomb, like, in the middle of this. I was like, "Hey, equal rights for women, Biden archivists," like, giant topic in the middle, but you had, like, 3 or 4 things that
oh yeah, we can
yes.
talk about
Yeah, I wanna
any,
talk about those because
oh well, we
like
can talk about any
'cause
one
this
of them.
this this story, with the ERA, I'm pretty sure is gonna still be, and it might even be a little bit more forward next week. I'm sure it's gonna be continuing through, like, for a little bit, but I figured I would drop that in there because there's this talk that with a simple call, he could pass the ERA. So, I
And
don't think it's that simple, though.
with a simple call, he could
With
pass
a
the
simple call to the archivist.
with a simple call to the archivist, he could pass the ERA, and then women would be a subject to draft. I think again,
I mean,
well,
like, I
again, I
but is
think
that fear mongering for women? When was the last time we had a draft here?
yeah,
So, yeah.
but I'm saying that again, decisions are being made about women, about things that impact their finances. In this case, in terms of Social Security, mostly,
Yes.
right? Things are
And our health.
about our health and about our civic duties. Again,
Yeah.
without us being a part of the dialogue and discourse and understanding, what this change might mean. So, like I said, it's kind of a last ditch thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't move in that direction, but I think that it's a big conversation that you dropped
I did.
that nugget into the punch bowl, but people, they need to know, and we need to have a conversation about it.
And we'll go back to this next week, and I'll be more informed, and I'll like actually I'll come to the table prepared. It was the holidays too, but this nugget did sit in my head.
Mhm.
And I was like, I need to just poop it out.
Well, it's a great turd in the punch bowl.
Turd in the punch bowl.
I mean, but it's something that we need to think about. So my topics were Louisiana health department ordered to stop promotion of vaccines. Independent Health has to pay $98 million for alleged fraud. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and my question is, why haven't there been any arrests? Florida law limiting children on social media. Which one you want to jump into?
Oh my gosh. Let's talk about limiting children on social media.
Well, Florida has passed a law that starts January 1st, 2025, that children who are under the age of 14 must be removed from social media platforms, right? And again, this goes into law January 1st in Florida. And so I guess a couple of things is, again, how do you enforce it? Because I mean, anybody can sign up for a social media account. Are you over the age of 18? Click yes. Now I have a social media account, right?
And it's interesting. It's under the age of 14, right? Because when you're 17 or 18, right, you can get a state ID. And not all of us have state IDs. Like if you don't drive, most of us assume that like the driver's license is like some kind of proof of adulthood, but it's not. It's just a proof of driving. We don't have an official state ID or federal ID that everyone gets that
Mhm.
says an age on it. Are we moving towards that? Scary, maybe. Good, bad, who knows? Is like a barcode to scan? I don't know. But yeah, how would you enforce that?
Mhm.
And then the other thought that I have is that social media has some things already on it that say like, are you under 13? At least I've seen it on Facebook. So the 14 sounds like 1 year above that, right? And so are you asking parents to be more accountable and aware of what your kids are doing? We should be doing that anyways. And what is the research about social media and children? We know that it's not great. We know that it does lead to them having feelings of imposter syndrome, like uh, maybe becoming self aware of things that they don't actually need to put on their plate, sexualize, more violence. Just looking at video, digital imagery, we know has an impact on human beings, right? Like the blue light and all of that stuff. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but the where you pointed out like how would you even enforce that? How would you enforce that? And is there a fine? And what and if there are fines, what are those fines? How like would this then be used to, and I hate to say this, but would this then be used to target families that have lower socioeconomics and lower education status as a way to control those who don't have like, and I hate to say, many people have used like television, right? The boob tube was the babysitter of the
Babysitting.
70s, 80s, and 90s. Is social media, because let's be honest, social media has turned into our TV channels of today. Uh, is that the new babysitter? I don't know how many times I've been in like a shopping store and seen like a toddler with like a one of those like iPad, like a pad, just like do 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 do, like entertained. So are like, is this a setup for targeting a certain group of people? Is this a call to action around like we're going to take care of kids better in Florida? What are they going to do if they're not on social media? Because I don't think, do they have books? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I know there's a book
They've been
burnings in
banned.
Florida. They've been banned. So what are they going to do without the social media? No,
But
but social media, I get where they're going with this. It
well,
does
here's the
seem
thing. I'm
healthy.
sorry. I think social media, first of all, I don't think social media is healthy for anyone, right? I think that all
Not for
adults,
your pockets.
I
I
mean,
buy all kinds of stuff in
well,
the
you got
ads.
a problem, and we're working on that. But I think in general, I mean, social media, because the algorithm is feeding you stuff, and depending, like I said, every once in a while, I take a look at my YouTube channel and look at what it's feeding me, and I was like, oh, you're quite angry, aren't you? Right? You know what I mean? And so I'm like, I just type in positive something, send me something positive, right?
We're gonna have nothing but a reinforcement of angry children.
Right, but again, also, social media is associated with young girls and higher rates of suicide, right? There's bullying on social media. There's all of these images that
And for boys too. We're finding that men are having lower self-image, lower, like, motivation to do stuff,
self-esteem.
so yes, so
It's not great. So you know what, I'm a part of me is not, and I think that annually, our Congress trots out these heads of these social media companies, and they're like, we're doing our best and we're sorry. But you know what, a few couple of years ago, when we had that Facebook whistleblower that said, there are some things that are going on this platform that's detrimental to children. And as a result of that, what has changed? I don't think much. So I'm not necessarily mad at Florida for saying, hey, you know what, let's try to do something about this. Interestingly enough, but then again, like I said, everything is a double-edged sword. Then does this move into somehow adult censorship?
yes.
Down the line, does it
Like,
open the door?
how do you control this?
How do
How are
you
you
control it?
going to control or how are you gonna monitor this?
How do you monitor
So
it?
this is another one of those laws or those ideas that comes about after we have technology and then we realize the impact on various groups in society, and we don't know how to, regulate, control it, monitor it, and we then attempt to, modify and put a system in place, right? Like, we jerry-rig something. How many of us have worked at companies where something was jerry rigged because a workaround because you realize two systems didn't fit together, right? And so this
Mhm.
is that the system of human beings coming together with social media and then realizing, hey, we opened up the gates to our smallest of small. And now we're realizing they're not doing so well. They're lonely, they're anxious, they're depressed, they don't go outside, right? They're literally me. No.
Well, I think China, interestingly enough, China has restrictions in place. So if you are, let me pull up
A
my.
lot of there are other countries that have restrictions on their social media, but,
I wasn't finished.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
yeah, China had proposes strict limitations on the amount of time children and teenagers can spend on social media. So for children under 8, their limit is like 40 minutes, and teenagers 16 to 18 can have up to 2 hours daily, right? So I think that there, I think that there should be some restrictions, in terms of that. But I also think that there are things that parents need to do, and simple things like, confiscating of cell phones after a certain time, or having laptops or computers in uh, open places in the home where you can look over their shoulder and look to see what are you looking at, what are you viewing. And I say this to say that, and because parents ultimately have the power to restrict how much social media folks consume, and as well as to put time limits on things, because I do think that I think society should protect children, but I also think that parents have a role it's not like we've let social media consume such a big place in our life, and we act like we can't control our consumption of it, but we can. And I think that parents have a responsibility there too.
Parents play a key role in this, but the other piece, the technology piece, so there are certain things on your phone, if it's a phone or a laptop, that you can add or you can activate for young viewers so that they can't get on a lot of this media. I did it for my son until he, it's probably still turned on. I turned it on and I was able to see and analyze. It depends on the technology and the type of phone that you have, or the type of, but there are things out there. And maybe we also need to upskill our adults. We like to pretend that adults are very technologically savvy, but we're not. And so maybe it's here's maybe if you're under a certain age, you don't have a cell phone that allows you to access blah, 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 blah. And maybe that's an option for being able to track these types of things. Maybe it's you turn this on if they're under a certain age.
I have freedom, stay focused, flipped, barrier, and off time, which allow you to block access to specific apps or websites for set periods of time to manage your screen time and reduce social media usage. So these are things that parents can do,
Yes.
in order to monitor and reduce the amount of time that their children are
But
on social media.
how advertised are they? Like, not just parents, but grandparents should know this, and aunties and uncles. We should all be aware of how to get into a phone or a laptop and monitor and make sure that the youngest and most vulnerable in our families and our communities are not inundated with just um, information that they don't have maybe the cognitive and behavioral abilities to kind of take in and understand. Even as an adult, I'm still prone to like, oh my gosh, I need to look a different way at 50, right? Like we're all prone to like the peer pressure of social media. And so maybe we can lift this off their plate. Thank you so much for bringing this, that Florida sometimes gets a bad rep about things because of, just as some things that have come out of Florida. But this actually is something that I think more states and maybe the country needs to be talking about: social media and our young folks. Like, what does that look like? You know, do we have an obligation to make sure that technology is not harming uh, our future generation?
Well, it's very, very interesting. And I was thinking, because, I've been fascinated with AI, right? First, let me finish this statement or this train of thought. One is that our world is ever evolving. And when it comes to technology, it's outpacing our legislation that protects us, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that parents need to take a active role, and change their role in some ways of being a protector of their children, right? And when it comes to technology, they've got to stay savvy, and aware, because there are real dangers out there, and they're psychologically impacting our children.
You know what? This brings me back to at in the beginning when we first started talking about the ERA, I said, "Well, why can't we have a homemaker role?" I don't know if you remember that, but I said homemaker. Like, why isn't that a job and why isn't that a paid job? Because we're talking about our the most vulnerable in our population. We do not have a homemaker role, right? That someone comes in and they get paid, whether that's in your family or outside of your family. But what about just a return to a homemaker role for like someone, either a spouse, a partner, someone you hire? Why is that not an official, real, respected role in society? We have daycare centers, right? But I wouldn't we don't think about that for older kids. But like, how are we really caring for kids? Are we putting money into this? Where are we putting our resources? Do we need different roles as AI shifts and changes some of how we do other roles? Do we need to start looking at our community roles, care for our aging population, care for our younger group, so that they're socialized around human beings, not just tech? What would that look like to go back and lean into community?
Well,
Um,
well, we're
yeah.
almost at the top,
I know, but I wanna hear about fraud. Can we
but
talk about fraud for, like, 10
but
minutes
but
maybe?
I want to finish with this
Okay.
one thing in terms of that. Is now that we've got AI, I mean, it is integrated into so many things that we use. I am really interested in how schools are going because when Johnny turns it into a paper and you're reading this paper and it's like, well, it looks like a PhD scientist wrote this paper, and
Maybe Johnny's smart.
Johnny hasn't been smart up until this point, right? I'm just really curious to see how, I mean, because it's so prevalent. I open things up and you see that little AI thing, and I was like, wow, it is so into. If I even wanted
It's
to,
everywhere. It's always asking me if it could, write something for me, or, it's like, "Would you like to turn on" what is it? The
turn off your
thing?
brain and get something everywhere you go. I mean, really, it's so integrated. So
Copilot, I think that's what's on the it's like, "Would you like
yeah.
to turn on Copilot? You
So
sound"
it's
it
gonna be interesting too for parents, and again, as the watchdog protecting their children, right? Because and I think all of us have to be careful that we don't become so complacent and forget that we need to think for ourselves. We need to be critical thinkers and not look to AI to answer all of our questions, but also understand that as your children, we research online, right? So if now, back in my day, you went to the library. Now you go online and you find resources, right? And so do these children, right? And so how do you make certain that your children are not relying on AI to complete their homework assignments and things of that nature, but are actually doing the work and forming those critical thinking muscles? You know what? Here's the thing. You talk about the caretaker role, the homemaker role. That role is getting more complex and more difficult.
which is why it should be an skilled role. It's a skilled role that we lack in society. Who
Well,
is going to employ we need some funds. Who wants to give me billions of dollars and I'll just
but here's the thing. I
start
mean, just taking
homemakers?
it back to the way education used to be, right? There was something called home economics, right? That
Hmm.
everyone,
There was also homework too. I do remember homework. My kids don't seem to have homework. They
well,
did it all in class.
yeah, which is not homework, right? But I mean, there were things that talk to you about, what it was to be in the home
Mhm.
and how to take care of your home responsibly and things of that nature. You can expand education in that way.
That could dive us into another topic because I really feel like wood shop, right? Do you remember wood shop and home economics? I dreaded both of them. I hated them
I
both.
didn't take wood shop. I wish I had. I
I took
didn't. We didn't have it at our school. I
We
went
had
to
to
a
take
girls'
both.
school.
We did 1 semester wood shop and 1 semester home ec. and we would rotate back and forth in grammar school, middle school. But I hated them both. But looking back, I learned like basically how to take care of the house, like things that would go wrong in the house. And like my kids didn't have that. I remember during the pandemic, I was like, we're going to sew some masks. And my son was like, I don't know how to thread a needle. And it boggled my mind that he had never learned how to thread a needle, which leads to a disposable society, right? If I can't repair my shirt, I'm going to have to buy a new one. So maybe pulling those things out of schools also leads us to what do they call it? Planned obsolescence when it comes to the things that we buy. Shein, Temu, all of these cheap products, right? Like cheap shirts. If you could repair it, if you knew how to repair it, maybe you would keep it. I don't know. Off on a tangent. So, but like fascinating, fascinating. I know we didn't talk about two of the things that you brought up.
That's
We
okay.
did like we are for I am curious about the fraud thing. I don't want to take us too long. I
Long
know we
story
have
short, long story
okay.
short. Okay, so you know what, American people, if you're listening, it's not color that is the problem. It's not folks coming over the border. I'm not saying that those things should not be regulated. I'm not
This is the
saying
fraud thing, right?
yeah. What I'm saying
Okay.
is that we really should identify who is really fleecing us, right? Okay, so don't be distracted. So what the independent health did, right? This is all in terms of inflating the payments that were being collected from Medicare and Medicare Advantage. And if you're not in the Medicare age range, Medicare Advantage is really a privatized insurance, and there it's that's a whole nother conversation. But what independent health did was like they created sort of what is kind of a shell company to go back and look at um, uh, patients' records and to find more evidence that would pull people into a higher risk pool, right?
Oh.
And because they're in a higher risk pool, then independent health could then charge more for, in terms of payments. This happened from, I think it was 2011 until, what was it? Until 2017, right? So they created a company. So it didn't look like independent health was doing this, but this company was a subsidiary of independent health. And other companies like Kaiser also use this shell company to do the same things. And Kaiser settled and did a payout, but it went all the way to our justice system, right? Our Attorney General's office,
In New York.
and um, no, federally.
Oh, federally. Okay.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And what I just love the fact that independent health then said, in terms of the settlement, right? This settlement is not an admission of any wrongdoing. Instead, allows us to avoid the further disruption, expense, and uncertainty of litigation in a matter that has lingered for over a decade, right? Can you not just say that it's because it's fraud? What they did was fraudulent. So they have to pay $34 million back, but it can go up to, in terms of damages and things of that nature, up to $98 million. The CEO of the shell company that was formed has to pay $2 million. My question is this: there are laws who have made our corporations, given them the rights of individuals and humans, right? So if I commit fraud, I go to jail. Why aren't there any arrests?
Because this is a company. And I just want to say, because I was curious, I've looked it up. Um, Independent Health, which is this is where I was thinking it's out of your area,
Yes,
Buffalo, right?
it's headquartered
Okay.
here.
They are worth 69.9 million. That's their annual revenue per year.
Oh, I
You
thought it was 1.6 billion.
This is saying every year their annual revenue, that's what they make, is 669 million
Is that
per
after?
year. That's just what they make, the revenue. And per employee, they make $308,000 per employee that they have on their payroll. So no matter what they're paying you, independents is still making more, unless you're at the top, maybe. And so they grew their employee count. They've grown every year. So 98 million, that's what they paid out.
Well,
That
that's
is
what they have the potential to pay out. They have to
they
pay out 34 million.
Well, that is not so if you're thinking just on what they make, that is not even like that's a small chunk. It sounds like a lot to the average citizen, but when you start talking about how much these health insurance and health companies make per year, because, like, I heard that, and, like, it's interesting they said this is not an admission of guilt. But if you think about the fact that to them, 98 million is like, let me give you $50, now go away. That's what that would be for, like, maybe one of us. Like, it's not a lot to them.
And see,
Um,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
which just like I was like $98 million is so much money because I can't even like imagine that. Like to me, that's like Scrooge McDuck, right? I'm like
Mhm.
this swimming in the 98 million. But then when I think about who they are, they have so much more than that.
And see, I saw a statistic that said I think in 2023 they made 1.6 billion.
Mm.
But here's the other thing: over the last 3 years, they've been losing money, and partly because of those weight loss drugs. And I thought to myself, karma is something else, ain't it? Mm.
It's still a lot of money.
But also think in terms of when we stop thinking about in terms of privacy, right? How many people did not know that their private healthcare records were being scrutinized by a third party, somebody not their doctors, not their insurance companies, but a third party that was looking at them and penalizing them wrongfully and putting them in a higher risk pool so that they could gain.
And it would be interesting to see who ends up in the higher risk pool and what the modifiers are for that, because you're talking about the older group in the United States, right? Medicare.
Or
You
any,
said Medicare,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Mhm.
So you could high risk anyone who's older because you tend to have more comorbidities as you age. It's just a fact of life. Like, did they account for age in those risking categories? Did they account for, like the chef? Did they account for like what made up? But that they probably risk people using certain things that
Yeah.
you know
And it was
are just naturally
fraudulent.
going to happen. It's yeah. So when you talked about like why weren't I know you mentioned why did anybody go to jail or why weren't there charges? It seems like that really happens with companies, right? Like there's almost this blanket protection that if you're in a company and you're doing the bad thing, you will be protected because the company is not a person. And I tend to think that we think of companies as like individuals. The public thinks of them as individuals, right? Like that they're going to be held to the same type of accountability that we would hold a person to, but they're not people. They are giant conglomerates made up of people who could make different decisions if they chose to, but the different decision might lead them to unemployment. So they often do not. And that's the problem with capitalism, right? If I'm dependent on a company to get my like in that way, then I might be dependent to have a different set of moral values than maybe serves the public.
Well,
Um,
I think, and this stuck out to me, one, because it's in my own backyard, and in terms of it being headquartered here. And again, I thought that, with insurance being in the news these days, with United Health, right, and the number of people that were, denied their claims and things of that nature, right? um, what at what point does criminality become punishable by actually having to stand trial for things? And again, like I said, don't fall for the distraction, folks. We should have universal health care, in my opinion, but at the very least, the United States citizens should be leaning on their representatives on the federal level to really investigate what is going on in these insurance companies and protect us from it. We deserve that protection.
We do. But here's an interesting question I'll throw out there. And anybody who's business savvy probably would be able to answer this better than I can. But what about potential caps on certain types of industry so that they cannot make hand over fist profits when it comes to profiting from uh, the social distress of people, right? So healthcare. Most of us agree that being healthy or having healthcare is a right. Should insurance companies, should even healthcare systems be able to profit hand over fist over the suffering of people? What is an acceptable margin of profit? Is it 1%? Is it less than 1%? Like when you say to organizations, we want you to grow every year, hand over fist, is that a driver for the worst parts of humanity? Like if I knew that profit was okay, I just have to meet my margins, like would healthcare in the United States look different? Or does it look this way because every year we say, oh, that was great, but can you make another billion on top of the billion? There's only so many people in the United States, right? There's only so many sick people, unless you want everybody to be sick. And then that opens up another question. Like, why did you high risk them? Because they weren't profitable enough at the regular risk level? Do you want them to be sicker? Are we saying health insurance is about, can I get some sick people up in here? Or is it about getting people better? Right? So, these are,
Mhm.
I dropped a duty and you dropped another duty right at the end, but I asked you to.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what we're here for, right?
Yes.
Filling the
Now I got to,
damn game.
so these are the things that should keep, like, maybe not keep you up. We don't want you to be stressed, but we do.
Aware.
We want you to be aware.
And to expand your conversations with folks
Yes.
and share, investigate. Don't let chat gpt, which I depend on, don't let it make all of your decisions for you, right? Do some research and figure out how we can actually hold people accountable, or corporations accountable for being ethical, right? Hold our legislators accountable for actually serving us. That's what they're there for, right? And so these are the conversations that we're having, but we've gone way over.
We have gone way over time. So thanks so much for joining us. We talked about a lot of stuff, and maybe we'll do something fun. We'll have to talk about this offline for the new year. Maybe we'll count down the new year with the most disturbing things that Melonya and I
Mm-mm.
have seen this.
No,
No,
no. We gotta, or the most
I can't even
innovative thing.
stay up till midnight, but we'll see.
Yeah,
Maybe
the
we'll
most
do something
innovative,
fun.
the most
Innovative?
the most
You can be
innovative.
innovative. I'll be disturbing. Maybe we'll
Okay.
have disturbing and innovating.
Let's do it. All right,
Let's
folks.
do it.
Thank you so much, and we will see you next week. Have a happy New Year and party like it's
Like it's
2025.
or party like it's 2023. No.
Here we go.
Thanks for
See you
joining
next
us on
week.
MT Fridays. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more insightful discussions every Friday. Remember, the brain drain stops here, so keep the conversation going by connecting with us on social media or visiting our website. Until next time, stay curious and keep filling your mind with knowledge. See you next week, Friday, on MT Fridays.